as we consider educational pathways in pharmacy this week, obviously an important part of that are the pharmaceutical disciplines. And it's really important to me that as a part of this course you have some fundamental understanding of what these disciplines are, so that when people say words like pharmacology or pharmacokinetics or words like that, that you have at least a basic understanding of what they're talking about. It makes you a more informed pre-pharmacy student, if that's what you are, or just a more informed health care consumer. So let's describe what these pharmaceutical disciplines are. And we talked earlier this week about the fact that these disciplines started to gel in the last part of the 19th century, and that, you know, advances in biomedical sciences was kind of happening at the same time, and that these things, particularly chemistry early on, drove how the curricula became laid out, and then in terms of what we studied and what we researched. So I want to think about the disciplines with you, and I'm going to give you several sort of heuristics about these disciplines. And this first slide I'm showing you shows what I think are maybe the more traditional academic definitions of the pharmaceutical disciplines. These are the, and you know, they vary somewhat between programs, but you'll tend to see courses in these kinds of categories you see in front of you now in the PharmD curricula and other kinds of pharmacy curricula that we'll discuss this week. So we have medicinal chemistry and pharmaceutics, we have pharmacognosy, we have pharmacology, and then we have pharmacy practice and pharmacy administration. And we're going to define those green terms, of course, as our pharmacy fundamentals at the end of this module. But let's look at the white ones on the bottom. What's pharmacy practice? So my faculty appointment is in the Division of Pharmacy Practice and Administration in our college. So I define the pharmacy practice field as, you know, how do we take these green terms that are in front of it on this slide? How do we take all this scientific knowledge from chemistry and pharmacognosy and pharmaceutics and pharmacology and all these things and really apply it to patient care? Here's a patient, has this condition, what drugs do we pick and why, and what do we monitor, and what do we know about the chemistry and the other scientific aspects of these drugs that help us be better practitioners. Pharmacy practice courses run across the board, and we have courses in therapeutics and in law. We study, you know, experientially. We have just a variety of courses that students take in the practice area. And then pharmacy administration. You know, when I was a student, I was not really interested in administration. I found this boring, and I wanted to be a practitioner. I didn't want to be a manager. And what I've come to learn is that pharmacists, and I know every professional, manages a large number of resources, no matter if you're a manager or not. We are managing practices, we are managing people, we are managing a large number of monetary resources in terms of drug supply and our facilities that we're using. So it's important that we understand certain administrative aspects of our field as well. So I lay these in front of you as kind of the traditional academic, if you will, kind of definitions of these disciplines, and we'll come back to some of them in our pharmacy fundamentals in a few minutes. I want to make this document that you see in front of you now, I'll bring it to your attention. I actually have a hard copy of it that I'm going to read a few things out of for you. I think this is an interesting document. It's provided by the American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists, AAPS. And this is available at aaps.org/for-students. It's also linked to our course website so that you can link to it and get it. I would recommend downloading this and having a look at it, maybe using it as you move along. And particularly, it helps define these pharmaceutical sciences, but if you find yourself interested in maybe pursuing more of a career along the science route in terms of research and those sorts of things, there's some good information for students in this document about that as well. We'll talk about that more this week, but this document might be helpful to you too. Well, if we look at this thing, and you know, the title of this document is a career in the pharmaceutical sciences right for me. And the first thing that they do is they define their definition of what the pharmaceutical sciences are. And they look a little different than what we think of in academia, although all these pieces go together and these words all kind of overlap with each other, and they sometimes mean similar things. But I want to run through very quickly 3 slides that show you the definitions of the pharmaceutical sciences. I'm going to read a little bit out of this pamphlet to you in terms of what they mean from kind of a pharmaceutical scientist, pharmaceutical industry, research-related perspective. So first of these disciplines they list as analysis and pharmaceutical quality, meaning analytical techniques, quality control and quality assurance, kind of straightforward. The next one being biotechnology. I think of biotechnology as harnessing kind of cellular and biomolecular processes to develop technologies and products. They include things under their biotechnology heading like research, development, and commercialization of biotechnology-based pharmaceuticals, including genes and gene delivery. The third science they define is clinical pharmacology and translational science. That's a big one. We think of clinical pharmacology as the science of drugs and their clinical use, and we think of translational science as taking science from the benchtop or in the laboratory to the bedside or clinical practice. So how do we translate what we're learning in these labs to patient care? And by the way, you should know that this translational science and translational research piece is a big emphasis of the National Institutes of Health in the United States. You're really trying to drive more kind of use of what we're learning into practice more quickly. In AEPS, they think of this clinical pharmacology and translational research. They say the clinical research dimension within the pharmaceutical sciences, it focuses on the therapeutic benefits and clinical assessment of drugs and biologicals. The next science that they will define for us is called, they describe as drug discovery and development interface, the medicinal, natural products, molecular and structural chemistry and drug design that relates to drug design and discovery. We'll talk more about drug discovery and development later on in our course, and we'll kind of understand a little bit more what that means. Their next science that they define is called formulation, design, and development. They define this as formulation design, research and development, a multidisciplinary field drawing upon the physical, chemical, biological, and engineering sciences. How do we formulate a drug? How do we design a drug that we can take and take it so that it helps us? And that's kind of a fundamental way of thinking about this one. Next, they talk about physical pharmacy and biopharmaceutics. Physical pharmacy I think of as changing kind of medicinal compounds from one physical state to another. It's part of that is formulation. How do we manipulate these compounds in a way that makes sense? And biopharmaceutics I think of as a study of medicines produced using biotechnology. This could be proteins, it could be nucleic acids, it could be living organisms, perhaps viral or bacterial. But they describe this as focusing on pre-formulation, biopharmaceutics, drug absorption, nanotechnology, and drug delivery system designs and performance, including targeted drug delivery. Think back to last week. We talked about Paul Ehrlich, and he felt he was looking for the magic bullet for how do we take these chemicals that Paracelsus told us were important in treating a localized abnormality and target it right to where it needs to be. And that is kind of drug delivery. It's the magic bullet. Come back. The next science they define are manufacturing sciences and engineering, the application and advancement of science and technology as it relates to process development and manufacture of pharmaceutical and pharmaceutically related products, including medical devices and active pharmaceutical ingredients. Obviously, once we discover these drugs and once we formulate them and test them clinically and find that they are approved, we have to be able to manufacture them in a way that makes sense, that's consistent and that is of high quality. So manufacturing sciences is a field of study that is of interest to the industry in particular. The next group they call, and this is an interesting grouping, pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, and drug metabolism. The effect of drugs and metabolites on the body and the effect of the body on drugs. This is an interesting way of thinking about this. So pharmacokinetics, our students study, and they study in the PharmD program extensively. I take a drug, how is it absorbed, how much gets into the blood, what blood levels are achieved, does it pass the blood-brain barrier, how does the body metabolize it or help to get rid of it, and how is it eliminated? And there's a timeline to this, there's a mathematical kind of dimension to it. We can predict sometimes very closely, knowing patient characteristics, if I give a certain drug over a certain amount of time, that the blood levels would be, X. And this is pharmacokinetics. And it really amounts to what the body does to drugs. Where does it send them? How does it metabolize them? How does it get rid of them? That's an interesting way to think of it, how the body, what it does to drugs. Pharmacodynamics, on the flip side, is what the drug does to the body. So, we think of that as a study of biochemical and physiological effects of drugs, their mechanisms of action, including the correlation between their action and their chemical structure. So pharmacodynamics will relate to the discipline we will describe in a minute as pharmacology, meaning study of drug action, what the drug does to the body to cause the effect. I take a high blood pressure medication every day. When I take that, what does it do to my body to make my blood pressure go down? And then drug metabolism, we know, is just what the body does, and usually in the liver or the kidney, to break a drug down and get rid of it. And those are important, very important sciences. And then finally, they describe the regulatory sciences, the strategic compilation of multidisciplinary information on product performance as it pertains to safety, efficacy meaning is it effective, and quality. So those are the pharmaceutical sciences that AAPS, the American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists, how they describe it. Let's look at our pharmacy fundamentals. So I want to go back to those academic definitions. We have medicinal chemistry. So in our college right now, we have a division of medicinal chemistry. It is involved in the synthesis or identification of new chemical compounds to be used as therapeutic agents, just as it sounds. And remember the importance of chemistry and where we've come from. The second pharmacy fundamental is pharmaceutics. So we have a division of pharmaceutics, and it is involved in the development of drug dosage forms and the study of drug delivery, disposition, and elimination, pharmacokinetics. One of the things about these disciplines is that in some cases these disciplines are unique. So pharmaceutics tends to be sort of unique to pharmacy. In other cases, like medicinal chemistry, for example, they overlap with other departments. Other chemistry departments or colleges of medicine or others do similar work as well. So sometimes our scientists have their feet in one camp, but more often there's kind of a blurriness between these disciplines, and they might have their feet in several camps. And as we know in life and as we know in science, the best things happen when we collaborate. So most often these scientists in these different disciplines are working together in a team to make a better product. Just like we'll learn in practice, our practitioners are working in a team to produce better patient care. The next pharmacy fundamental is pharmacognosy, the identification and study of drugs from natural sources. And we've learned last week already that early man started using usually plant sources to help treat diseases. Pharmacognosy is alive and well. Still finding new chemical compounds from natural sources that are used to treat disease. A lot of these sometimes even in the oceans. But it's an important science, a cool science, I think. And I hope I'm going to share with you later in the course a book that might be of interest to you in terms of how these scientists are doing just that. And then lastly, our pharmacy fundamental, pharmacology, or the study of drug action, much like pharmacodynamics described by AAPS. And then let me leave you with a question. If we think about our discussion forums this week, what would I like you to be thinking about, among other things that are on your mind? One is, why would studies in the pharmaceutical sciences be important for someone entering a career in pharmacy practice? I'm going to be a practitioner. I'm not going to be a scientist. Why do I have to study all this stuff? So that's all for this module. I will see you soon.